So here I am in the Fat Quarter Shop studio, and I wanted to talk to you about and then show you how to make my newest bottle cap pattern. I'm a little bit obsessed with it. We've made 5 different ones of them so far, and I think I'm gonna start another one in a different color grouping soon. They're kind of addictive to make once you start. The pattern itself comes with a plastic template that you're going to use, and it comes with paper like this, and you just take the paper off. And then you have the shape that you need to cut your little spokes on the bottle caps. And the other great thing about this pattern, which might be why we're making so many of them, is that you're basically going to cut 2 quilts out at once. And so because of the way that the strip set gets constructed and the way that you cut it apart basically like this with the template, you're going to make the wedges for these big circles in a bigger version of the quilt at the same time that you're making the wedges for the small. So if you can see here, this came from the same strip set. This was one side of the strip set, and this light gray fabric is on the other side of the strip set, and here is the smaller version of it. It's in the alternate location. This is on the outside and this is on the inside. It ends up with a smaller quilt. But you're basically going to make and cut all of the blocks and all of the pieces that you need for 2 quilts at once. And so then you have to decide on what you're going to do with the background, and I'm going to show you a couple different versions that look completely different from one another. The 2 that are here in front of you have the cream that's in the circle, that's in the block, and you have a completely different color on the back, which makes these really pop out and really appear like the circles that they are. This one is a little bit softer on the smaller one. We've added posts on this one that are all scrappy. On this one, it's just white. On the quilt behind me in the video is the same exact pattern, the big circles, but they are on a cream background, and so which is the same color as the fabric, the background fabric that's used in the block. And so the block appears completely different because it kind of melts into the background a little bit. So there's a lot of different variations that you can do with this pattern. Purely depending on what you choose for the alternate fabric in your blocks and in the background fabric itself. So let me start showing you how to make this. So the starting point of this quilt is 2 strip sets. So what you're going to do if you're working on, depending on which size of the quilt you choose, you can do one of the quilts that's 9 blocks or one of the quilts that's 16 blocks. And so obviously you would choose a different amount of strip set combinations depending on which one you're working on. But right now, what I have here to show you is we're going to work on 1 set. And so I've chosen a red and a green because I like the way that they go together, and they're going to be in 1 block. And I've cut the smaller strip set, or the smaller strip and the larger strip out of my 2 colors, and also the same out of my 2 backgrounds. And the information is all in the pattern in terms of the sizing. But as you can see, basically you've got the big and the small in this combination here, and you have it flipped. The color is in the large position and the background is in the small position in the second strip set. And you'll need both of these for 1 block. And as I mentioned before, as you're cutting, you're basically going to be cutting enough of the pieces for all of the sets for 1 quilt, as well as the larger quilt, as well as the larger block, as well as a smaller block. So you can kind of decide once you start which one you want to do first. So here you have this one. As you can see, I'm going to move this one over for a second, and I'm going to start by cutting the green one. And as I showed you before, the pattern comes with the template, the shape, and you're basically going to line it up on your strip set. And if you pressed well and everything was cut well, this will be exactly the size. The template is the exact size of your strip set. And you have pressed, I can't remember if I mentioned this, you're going to always press towards the color. So on both strip sets, you're going to press towards the color. So in this case, that would be towards the green and towards the red. And you're going to line this up, and I always scoot it as far to the beginning as you can. You're going to have way enough in this strip set for all of the pieces that you need. For this particular block, you're actually going to have a piece left over of your strip set. But I naturally always start at the very, very beginning to save as much in case you want to use that strip set for something else. You're basically going to line that up, and you're going to cut right alongside of it. And I'm going to cut just like this with my hand backwards. If that's awkward for you, you could walk around your table. You could work on the corner of your table so that it's a little bit easier to get around it. That's your little excess piece that you've got done, and you've cut one piece, and you're going to basically start a little pile. So that's going to be for one block, and you're basically going to take that same triangle and just flip it right over, line up the piece that you've already just cut, and cut again. And this piece is going to look totally different. So this is going to be for one block, and this is going to end up being for a completely different block. And you're basically going to go do that exact same thing that you have done all the way down the strip set. It's really very simple. And you're just going to line those up, and you're going to do the same thing on this side. And you're going to cut your 6 pieces of each one, which is what you need. So I've only got 2 and 2, but you're going to end up with 6 and 6 of 1. And when you're done with that, you're going to roll up the end of your strip set, and you're going to do the exact same thing with your alternate color. Okay? So you're going to line that up, and you're going to do the same thing. It doesn't really matter which side you start on, because you're doing both the triangle from the top and the bottom. So you're going to trim that. And then you've got that one awkward motion at the beginning where you're trimming up that side kind of backwards, and that's your leftover. Here's the beginning of the next set. Again, this one looks even different because the color is in the big position. So that would be like what is here in the cream. So there's one. And here's 2. You see that one? And you would continue that all the way down the strip set. And I'll just do 2 of each. But you would go all the way for all 6 pieces on each side. So people have asked me, well, can I just do one size and not the other? Well, you can certainly not complete both quilts, but you can't not cut it out because it comes, basically they're alternates. You have to do one in order to do the other. So you can decide to do something completely different with the other set, but you will end up cutting them one way or the other. So once you're done with your strip sets, as you can see here, you have 4 completely different sized blocks, and 2 of them are going to go in one block and 2 of them are going to go in the other. So they're labeled A's and B's in the pattern. And so this one from the first set, your B's are, here are your A's, and here are your B's. And so you're going to take the same ones, and these I called them C and D. And so you're going to take the C's and the D's, and they're going to end up being in 2 completely different parts. And I'm going to show you the next step in a second. So as you can see here in front of us, I've laid out the 6 pieces that we've cut from each of the sets, the green and the red, in the 2 combinations. And the pattern tells you exactly, which combo from which strip set goes in which of the 2. As you can see, they're in a completely different position. So you've got the red in the long, skinny position in the center one of this one, and you've got it in the big, fat portion of the outside ring. And the flip is true of the green. So here you've got the green on the outside, kind of in the fatter, wider position. And here you've got it into the little inner wedges. And as you see right now, the 2 blocks are exactly the same size because they came from the same strip set. But once these get put together, these will go into one of the larger quilts, or what I'm calling the first one, the version A, and they won't really get trimmed up very much. They'll more or less be the size of what we're starting with. When I designed the pattern and I came to do the second set of them, which will go in a completely different quilt, I didn't like the proportion of the fabric that's here. You see how it's small and skinny and this piece is gigantic. It didn't really look the way that I wanted, and that's when I came up with the idea of this is going to become a much smaller circle so that these portions are proportionate. And so this is going to get trimmed down. You're going to cut off about that much of that here, and it's going to become a much smaller circle in the version that's with the smaller blocks. And so you start off with the same, you do one where the proportions are larger. This one, you're going to end up with the smaller. These will go in 2 separate quilts, as 2 separate sizes. You could experiment with it and put them both in the same quilt and have completely different, if you, once we've got the circle that goes in the inside, you could absolutely work with some of your own designs in there if you like. This was the way I decided to separate them out so that I liked the way proportionately that the bottle caps felt in each one. And so basically the way that you would do, so if you're working on the 9 block, you would make 9 of these combinations for the big one. And then you would end up with 9 little ones that you could put into a smaller 9 quilt. If you wanted to do the 16, then you would do 16 combinations like this for the large quilt, and you would have then 16 for the small, or vice versa. If you wanted to work with the small first and have those be your leftovers or your second quilt, then you could do that. But you're basically going to cut out 2, so you might as well have the fun of making 2. Okay, so we've changed fabrics, so don't be confused. We're now working on the small block just for the sake of the demo. So we have taken the set that we did from this. Here the position of the green is in the big one and the red is in the inside. And I've put them together into doubles. You can do it into basically 2 sets of 3 or 3 sets of 2 because you've got 6 on one side and you got 6 wedges on the other side. So the way I sew these together is I line them up. There's only one spot that matters in this entire block, one join, and it's the center one. So I start there. I don't start sewing there, but I start positioning everything there. I make sure that those 2 align and I pin there. And wherever those 2 end up in the center and wherever they end up on the end, it doesn't matter because the center gets covered completely by the center circle and the outside part is going to get trimmed off when you turn the entire thing. So literally one join matters on every single time. So it's one of those quilts. It's another reason why I love it is because there's not a lot of matching that you have to worry about. If anything has stretched out or is bigger or anything like that on the end or on either end, it doesn't matter, which I love. So you're going to pin in that one spot and then you're going to line it up based on that. You're going to sew 1/4 of an inch all the way down from beginning to end. And then you're going to flip it over, press it out. There isn't really a direction in which you can press them all in one direction. You can press them open if you like. I just kept pressing as I went. So you're going to end up with a half when you're done. And you're going to do the exact same thing. You're basically just going to keep going. And as you can see, this is the placement of the 2 halves are the same. Okay, so you do 1/2 and another half. So at this point, we have 2 halves of the block. Now, I know you see that these are different fabrics, so just pretend that they're the same. I just happen to have a sample of a different fabric. I get bored, so I don't make all of them in the same thing. So you've got 2 halves, and you're going to flip one around like that, and you're going to make the circle, and you're going to line it up in the center, and you're going to line it up in the same way in terms of worrying about what lines up with what, the same thing as we did before. We're really only going to worry about the lineup of these 2 joins here, where these 2 pieces join. And on the other side, we're going to worry about these 2 joins here. And we're really not going to spend a lot of time worried about what happens in the center or what happens along the outside, because like I mentioned before, they're going to get either cut off or trimmed. So you're going to line those 2 up, and then you're going to sew all the way down. Now, along in the pattern, and there's directions for this, if you need to trim up anything, you can. If you feel like this isn't going to come together in a straight line, you can do a little tiny bit of trimming. I wouldn't worry about it. We have, of all the ones that we've made, I haven't had any that have had any much puckering at all, because you can if you really need to, you can press the center in a little bit more to get it to condense down if you're finding that you're getting a little bit of a cup, but mostly it gets covered up, so it really doesn't end up being much of an issue. But what you're going to do then is when you're going to sew those 2 together, and you're going to get a circle, and I'm going to move this out, and believe it or not, this is going to be a different color also. Okay, look, completely different color grouping. I have to entertain myself as I go along, so there you go. So this is your whole circle right here, and as maybe if you can tell, sometimes when you press, you get a little bit of those kind of like pressing marks. So I press the center well. Here's one, just so you can see, and we're working on the small version this whole time, the smaller of the 2. Here's another one. That was another combo. This one happens to be black and green. So what you're going to do is you're going to make the amount of those that you're working on, either the 9 or the 16. I'm going to move those out of the way. And the next step, what you're going to do is, and I don't know if you can see that, that's I've already sewn this on there, but I'm going to tell you what I'm doing, is in the pattern, you're going to get the large and the small circle right in there, and you're going to trace that onto a piece of fusible interfacing. And so the one that I like to use is the Pellon fusible shear weight. And if you can see on here, one side of that has these tiny little dots on there, and you can feel them with your fingers too. That's the fusible side. So as you're sewing this to your circle, that's the side that's going to go on the outside, and the part that's not fusible is the one that's going to go up against the block. And so this step is you're going to trace the shape that you get in your pattern onto a circle of the fusible. And I used the same friction pen, made a circle, and then I basically centered it. So I found the center of my block and I made sure that my piece was centered on there. I pinned it on, basically with pins. I've already taken them out at this point all the way, and I've sewn on the line of the circle, not around it, but on it. Okay, right on the line. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim off the remainder of that all the way around, because otherwise it would get really bulky. Now what I found on these is that sometimes on the bigger ones, you don't really need to worry about doing a lot of clipping. And sometimes if you find that it's just not working out for you well, you can clip it also. But mostly trim about a scant quarter of an inch all the way around that fusible that you have. Now I wouldn't worry about it being completely precise, because again, you've already sewn your circle. So it's just not that important as long as you're trimming off all that bulk. So bear with me while I make it all the way around. There you go, almost done. Okay, so, and that's a little bit big, so I'll trim a little bit off there. So you basically trimmed it all the way around. And then what you're going to do next is you're going to lift off, as you can see, you've got like a little, I don't know what that is exactly. You've got a thing. You're going to take a piece and you're just going to clip the fusible, and you're going to make sure that you're nowhere near your fabric when you do that, so you don't clip your fabric. But you want enough, not too much, but enough so that it's really easy to turn. So I basically just do, what is that, maybe 3.5 inches or so, just in the middle. And you're going to use that, basically you can get your hand in there, and you're going to turn your entire wheel around through that fusible, and you're going to use your fingers. I'm first just going to basically open it up. You know what this looks like? This looks like a shower cap. So you're going to turn your shower cap. I'm going to move this off because that looks yucky. First I'm just going to do it with my fingers, and then I'm going to kind of just press it a little bit to make sure there's no issue on anything. I'm going to turn it to this side, and at that point I would take it to the ironing board, and I would basically just with my iron, I would slowly go and work it out with my finger. Now remember that one side of this is fusible, right? So as you're pressing it, that inside part, you're fusing it slowly to the back of the fabric. So once you put your iron on it, there isn't going to be a ton of moving around that you can do with it, right? So be sure that you've kind of pressed it out before you do that. And literally, this is what I usually do. I kind of work it out with my finger and I press it. And what you want to avoid is you want to avoid seeing that interfacing. And I don't know if you can see that specifically enough on the camera, but you don't want that interfacing to come over to the top or even to be visible on the side. So you just want to make sure that when you're pressing it, that you're pressing it enough so that what you see is you see the fabric and you don't really see any of that fusible coming, and you basically will get a perfect circle all the way around. So that's kind of what I look at when I'm literally, I kind of, I take my fingers and I wet them a little bit and I do that kind of very technical thing of pushing it out a little bit and then press, push and press, work on it, press it. And I would just do that. I would do that all the way around the entire circle. And when you're done with that, you basically have fused this whole back part to it, and you've got a perfectly finished circle that's done. Now, for those of you who are paying really close attention, you'll notice that on this one, I've been working on the small version of the block, but I didn't actually do the trimming on here because I was working with the bigger one, just a bigger template. So if you were working on the small one, so just, what is it called? Suspended disbelief, where you pretend that you're seeing something else. Pretend that I did this one small, because this would technically be the small block, but since I happen to have the piece on here just as a sample, so I wanted to show it to you in a bigger circle because it's easier to see. But this would technically have been the smaller circle on this version, and so it would look like this all the way around. It'll be a little bit more proportionate, these two sides. Okay, so this is the end of that. You would do this with every single one of your 9 or your 16 blocks, and the only thing that's left to do at this point is to attach the center circle, and we'll do that in just one moment. As you can see here in front of us, we have yet another fabric combination. I think I've probably showed you like 5, and we're supposed to pretend that it's all one block. I hope you're still with me. So we've done the whole interfacing thing on the back of this. We've turned it. It's been turned and pressed all the way around the outside. And then I've done the exact same thing with the circle on the inside. And in the pattern, you've got the size for that also, a bigger size for the bigger block and a smaller size for the smaller block. And so what you'll have done with the center is you'll have done exactly the same thing that we did with the interfacing, or all the way around. And the only difference on the little one is that I would clip the little edges around. And because it's so small, when it's turning, it does tend to get a little bit bulky on the outside, and it's harder to get a good circle on the little one, whereas it's really quite simple to get it on the bigger one. So whereas I wouldn't do clipping or worry about it really on the big ones, on the blocks, I would do it on the center circle. And so what I would have done here is I had done the exact same interfacing thing. I did a little clip. Now the clip is smaller on this one, so just be careful. Stay away from the fabric when you do it. Turn it inside, clip the edges, sorry, then turn it inside out. Press it all the way around so that you've got a perfect little circle, and then center it, stick it in the very center of your block, make sure that it's the same in all the directions, and then if you can see that right here, I would top stitch it all the way around, and I'm going to show you how I do that on the outside part in a second, but I do the exact same thing here on the center. And so you basically have a freestanding, ready, finished block before you attach it to your background. And so then the very last step of creating these is to attach it to the back. And so the way I do that, I'm going to show you that right now, is I get my background piece, and again, it tells you what size to cut those in the instructions to the pattern. And I've gotten it, and I've pressed it in half in one direction, and then in half again, and then I basically just press that so that I get lines, so that I know exactly where to line up my wheel, my circle, and then I just lay it out flat. Okay, so there's my piece, and I'm using a Bella Solid from Moda, and it's the ivory. The number is 60, I believe. And I'm going to now take my wheel, and this is the big one, and I'm going to line it up along those marks so that I know it's centered, and I want it to be, it should be, if everything went well, it should be about a ½ an inch away all the way. Not a quarter, because it's not going to come all the way to the end when you're done. There's a little tiny bit of a float so that you have a little bit of leeway. I did that on purpose. And so you should be anywhere between 3/8 to a ½ an inch off on all four. And I'm going to use my favorite pins. They're the Little House pins. I think I've been using these for about, I don't know, 12 years or so. They're like the only pins that I'll go rummaging around on the ground for. If other ones fall, a lot of times I'll just sweep them away. But not these. I find these and I put them back in my pincushion. I love them. They go through fabric like butter. I'm not much of a gadget gal, but there's like a few things that I can't live without. And it doesn't hurt that these come in this totally cute little tin. So I'm going to take my pins, and I'm basically going to pin. And you could pin, it's probably safer to pin from the out in. Let me redo that one so I don't poke myself later on. And you don't have to pin everywhere. It's once you've got a couple pins in there, it's really not going to go anywhere. So it's all about, I would get maybe at least 3 or 4 pins in each quadrant. So as you're sewing, it doesn't kind of ease up on you and it stays in one spot. And I'm not going to pin all the way around here because you would get bored watching me put all those pins in. But so I would pin all the way around as much as you need, as you feel like you need, or as little as you feel comfortable with. And I'm going to now take this to the machine and show you just a very simple top stitch all the way around. So I have the block here, and I'm literally going to line up my foot about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge, just right along the end, right around the side. Oh, that's not what I want to do. I think that's all the way down. I'm not sewing on a familiar machine, so bear with me if I mess it up for a second here. So basically about 1/8 of an inch, I'm going to start sewing real slow. And it's just a top stitch. It's just a regular old straight line. And I know you guys are gonna yell at me, but I'm gonna sew right over those pins. I do slow down, so I'll speed up a little bit as I'm sewing, but then I'll slow down when it comes time to the pins. It's just the way I do it. I apologize in advance. So basically, I'm gonna sew all the way around, and I'm not gonna keep going all the way around because you guys don't need to watch that. But so as you can see, this is just a standard top stitch right along the edge. That's what I usually do on these, but you can of course also do a blanket stitch, any kind of, if your machine does any other kind of decorative stitch. I've seen really pretty decorative stitches done on these. If you're working on a real basic machine, you could also just do a zigzag. You can do a zigzag that you've flattened out a lot if you have that option, and just make it go basically in and out. So there's a couple different options of what you can do. The top stitching, if you're going to do like I've done, just work to have it be as close to the outside as possible, because if you were to go in like a 1/4 of an inch, for example, then that whole piece is kind of open and it flaps, and then it might get stuck in quilting, or it comes up later on and you don't want that. So you just want it along the outside. And that's the same thing that I did on the circle. So if you can see, I'm going to bring that in here so you can just see it. It's the exact same thing here, just top stitched around about 1/8 of an inch around, and that's the same thing I'm going to do for that. You would then do that with every single block with either your 9 or your 16, and then you would be ready to assemble the quilt. Okay, so at this point you have completed all of your blocks, and we were working in the demo with all of the hazel and plum fabrics, which is like the one that's back here, and you've pieced in all of your circles, all of your blocks. And as you can see, and as I talked about at the very beginning, there's lots of different options for settings on this one. So this one is put on the same background color that's used here inside the block. So as you can see, it kind of fades into the background, and you can see a little bit more of the spokes, kind of the bottle caps feel. And on the other ones that we talked about, and the green one and the yellow one, it looks and appears completely different because the background is a different color. So on these, they're sashed, and there's no posts on this one. So it's a more plain feel in the back, and it really showcases the fabrics and the kind of the design of the spokes. And I think, and like I said at the beginning, I think the reason I'm enjoying making this over and over again, usually I get bored after I make the same pattern once or twice, but like I said, we're on our 5th or 6th sample of different, and I haven't gotten bored of it. And I think because of the 2 sizes and the different ways that you can set it, I don't know, it just keeps making me happy. So this is this one here. As you can see, we did the different color circles again, balanced them all out so that you have a little bit of the brighter colors balanced out through the quilt. And I used one of my favorite prints of this collection on the outside. It's like this kind of fantasy floral feel, and it's in every single colorway in the collection. That's my favorite. I love it. So of course I figured out a way to put it in this one. But so that's this version. And then if we come back to the yellow and the green version that I showed you guys at the very beginning, again, you can kind of see, now that you know how to make it, you can see kind of the different variations that you could play with. This is the bigger one. It's got posts and the darker color on the back. This has got a lighter color with multi-posts. I did just recently do another quilt. A friend of mine got married, and I used both the sizes, the bigger one and the smaller one, in one quilt together. I had to move stuff around. It was kind of a custom thing that isn't particularly in the pattern, but if you like to kind of mess with stuff yourself and kind of make it your own, that was a really fun way to figure out how to put both size blocks in the same quilt. So there's a lot that you can do with it, and hopefully you will enjoy making many of these, just like I have. Thanks.